Hello, my name is Cyrus Nilchan and I'm a technical evangelist for IBM Storage. Today I am going to install TSM for virtual environments version 6.4, and after the installation I will run through a basic configuration, configuring the product on one proxy with one Datamover. First, I have to install the TSM Backup Archive client. And I can do this simply by clicking on the setup program. I select the installation language. And the machine which you are seeing now is the Proxy server, which in my case is a Windows machine. The Install Shield wizard will guide me through the installation. I select the default path, and as setup type I have to select custom. This is very important because I have to select the VMware vStorage API runtime files. This is basically the vStorage API, which allows TSM for virtual environments or the BA client to connect to vCenter. I am also going to install the administrative client command line interface, which is always helpful. Keep in mind this is very important and it is not selected by default. I start the installation now. My installation is finished, and I can click Finish. Now I will configure the TSM Backup Archive client. And I will go with a temporary configuration, which allows me to make sure that the TSM Backup client is properly functioning and that it has connection to a TSM server. In my case, my TSM server is already installed, and all I am going to do here is I am going to connect to the TSM server. So I want to create a new option file, and I'm using a temporary node name, which I will change later. My communication method will be TCP/IP. And now I have to specify the IP address of my TSM server. I do not need include/exclude lists. I do not need common file exclusions. And I go with the default domain. And I am going to apply my settings now. I am prompted with a login to the TSM server. Specify my password. This node name is already defined in my TSM server. Again, I'm just doing this for the initial setup in order to find out whether my TSM Backup Archive client is properly working and whether my TSM server is reachable. In my case, the password is actually expired, so I specify a new password, and my TSM option file has been successfully written, and this tells me that everything is okay up to this point in time. And the actual graphical TSM Backup Archive client is coming up. The next step in the installation process is to install TSM for virtual environments. TSM for virtual environments is comprised of 5 components. The most important component is the actual recovery agent. You can install all of these components simply by selecting the Setup exe program here again. And keep in mind, all these components are also available on Linux. So I am configuring a Windows proxy server or backup server here, but I could also select to install a Linux backup server or proxy. Installation wizard has started. I accept the license agreements, and here are the 5 components which are included in the TSM for VE installation package. So there's the data protection for VMware recovery agent, the most important piece. This piece allows us to do individual file level recovery from files that have been backed up as part of a full virtual machine level backup. Then there's a command line interface allowing us to do the exact same thing. There is a little bit of documentation to it, and then there is an enablement file. That enablement file is basically, it's a license file, and it allows the TSM backup archive client to do incremental and specifically incremental forever backups. And last not least, there is the data protection for VMware vCenter plugin. That is the graphical user interface for TSM for VE, which runs inside of vCenter. So this is not selected by default. I will select it now, and that means I will also run a shrink down web server on this exact same proxy, which will then host up the plugin GUI to vCenter. So I'm basically installing everything on this one machine here. Now I am prompted to enter the connection parameters and the credentials for vCenter. So TSM for virtual environments communicates with vCenter, which could basically sit anywhere in your environment, and this is how it gets the required information for the virtual machines and also for the data stores. So I have to specify the vCenter credentials. And by clicking next, it will try to open up a connection and make sure that it can connect to vCenter. Once you do this, make sure that there are no firewalls in the way of connecting. You can also put this piece, basically our plugin, onto the vCenter server itself. That would also be a possibility. Okay, I click next, and now TSM for virtual environments is being installed. Now I am prompted if you would like to install the device software, and I go ahead and do so. It now tells me that the vCenter plugin is successfully installed, and it also gives me the ports. So there's port 22 SSH, there's port 3260 iSCSI, there's port 1527 Derby, and there's port 9080 for EWAS. And my install wizard has completed, and I simply click on finish now. I can read a little bit of a log entry here. And now I have to restart my proxy server, which I will go ahead and do. The machine has rebooted. So the backup server or proxy is now back online, and I can log into VMware vSphere client. Which will now have the TSM for VE plugin installed and accessible. It is programmed as a plugin, so all I have to do is I have to go to Home, scroll down, and here it is, the Tivoli Data Protection for VMware vCenter plugin. And it's coming up now for the first time. And it has detected that the configuration has not been done yet. So what I want to do now is I want to go through the configuration wizard, which is automatically launched right from here. So all I have to do is I have to click on that button here, and it will take me through the configuration. It will define the nodes that I need in TSM, and it will also create the proxy node relationships that are required. I will run through the configuration of one Datamover. So I need to provide the TSM server address. And I have to have the Tivoli Storage Manager Administrator ID. Which I want to save. And I click Next. And there are TSM node definition options. I am just going to go with the default here. And it will create a TSM vCenter node name. All I need to do is specify a password. Now it does also create a vmCLI node name. This node name is required for metadata work. So the plugin will use this node name quite extensively. And finally, I have to select a data center, and the data center is as it is defined inside of vCenter. And it found automatically the one that I have here in my environment. So I only have to click Next. And now the last step is to register the nodes which actually do the work. So those are the nodes that are transmitting the data over to the TSM server. It will automatically do that for me. The only thing I have to do again is I have to specify a password. And the password needs to be specified for the node name and also for the node name of the individual data mover. If you have multiple data movers, you need for each data mover a separate node with password. And those are proxy nodes, meaning they can act on behalf of each other. So this way you can back up with one data mover and restore with a different data mover. Passwords have been set, and all I have to do is click Finish, and the wizard will register the nodes. It will apply the proxy node relationships, save the domain settings, updating the vmCLI profile, and setting the required passwords. It will then do a final check and the verification of the actual data mover nodes. And once everything is successful, the product is configured. if you want to configure another Datamover, you can do so by simply putting out the install package and then run through the configuration wizard for an additional Datamover node. So everything was successful here. However, there is one last step we have to do in the TSM Backup Archive client, which is finally the piece of software that will do the data movement. And this is why we get this message here, and we'll do that piece of work right now. So I minimize the vSphere client now, and I will start the TSM Backup Archive graphical user interface again. And the final configuration is done from here. I'll do it graphically. And the configuration is basically a two-step process. One step is editing the dsm.opt file to the correct values. And the other step is to configure a web client or a client acceptor daemon. So step one can be done by going to the client preferences. And I will now basically reconfigure this TSM Backup Archive client to act as a data mover. So I have to select now a node name, and I'm going to select ts631_dm as node name. You could also specify the upper node name here. This way you would then be able to see the data, whether they've been transmitted from the plugin GUI or from the backup archive client. I will just use ts631_dm in my case, and in the communication settings, I can verify that I'm using the correct TSM server. Under authorization, I have to set password access to password access generate. And finally, in the VM backup section, I have to specify, again, the IP address and the user and the password of vCenter. I have done that before, but I did it for the plugin GUI. Now I'm doing it for the TSM Backup Archive client for the actual data mover. And you can see here VMware transport methods. We can transport through the SAN. We can do hot add, NBD, and NBD SSSL. Okay, let's apply the settings. So the last step is to configure a TSM web client or client acceptor daemon process, CAT. I have to exit the TSM Backup Archive client, and then I have to restart it in order to be able to run through the wizard with the new values that are in the dsm.opt file. So I go to Utilities, Set Up Wizard, and this wizard will help me to configure the TSM web client. The web client is the piece that is being called by the plug-in graphical user interface, by the VMware vCenter plugin that is provided by TSM for virtual environments. So this is how it communicates with the actual proxy servers and data movers. So you have to have the CAT running on each backup server or proxy. So I'm just using the defaults here to install a new web client. This is going to be the name of the service. Default directory, default port number. Now, in my case, I'm using ts631_dm as node name. And specify the password. and I want to automatically start this service whenever Windows boots. And I also want to start it right after I am finished. I click on apply, and we have gotten a success message here. So that means everything's working and the communication has been established. This was it. We have now configured TSM for virtual environments. Let me repeat the steps real quick. First, I installed the TSM Backup Archive client. Then I configured the TSM Backup Archive client. Then I installed TSM for VE, the complete package. Then I've configured TSM for VE using the configuration wizard in the vCenter plugin GUI. And then finally, I have reconfigured the TSM Backup Archive client to be a Datamover. As a next step, we will take a look into the configuration files which were being created as part of this installation process. So first, let's go to Program Files, x86, Common Files, Tivoli, TDP VMware, TSM VMware plugin, scripts. In here there is a file called vmcli profile. This file contains the configuration parameters for the plugin to successfully communicate with the data movers. Let's have a look. Open it with Notepad, and those are the parameters that have been set as a result of the configuration process. Please keep in mind that the VE underscore data center underscore name TS631 column TS631 is case sensitive. So this one must be set properly in order for the plugin to function properly. Okay, let's close this. And I want to go into the log directory. It's the same path, just a logs directory, and here you can actually find the logs that were being created, and you can also debug in case you have any problems by looking at the log in this directory. Another relevant log is the one that is in the TSM Backup Archive Client directory. Let's navigate there. That's Program Files, Tivoli, TSM, BA client, and there is a dsm.error log file in case you have some errors. Here it is. And what we also find in this directory is the dsm.opt file. This has also been created as a result of our installation and configuration process. Let's take a look at this. Here we find the node name, and here it could be changed, TSM server address, password access generate, and the parameters to connect to vCenter. Another component that has been created is a service. In case of Windows, it's a Windows service, and it is called IBM WebSphere Application Server, TSM VE plugin. If you ever have problems, you can restart the service or debug through this operation like this. I am going to restart it now. Okay, another way of doing some debugging and to check if everything went through successfully is by starting the TSM Backup Archive Client command line. In here, I can do a show VM all, and this command will show me all virtual machines on a VMware server. In order to do this, the TSM Backup Archive client, or the Datamover, which is basically the same thing, has to be able to establish a successful communication to vCenter and also to the TSM server. So we can see it found one VM called tet_NFS, another one bill_local, and the first one winxp_NFS. So this tells me that the connection has been established and everything looks good. Another instrument for debugging is the vmCLI. The vmCLI runs in C program files, x86, common files, Tivoli, TDP for VMware, VMware plugin, scripts. vmCLI is the actual command, and if I just put in vmCLI, it tells me all about the options that I have available here. I want to choose vmCLI -f for function, and I will do an inquire. An inquire will actually tell me if my configuration is good, and you can see my return code is 0, so my configuration was successful. Final confirmation, of course, can also be achieved by staying in the TSM Backup Archive command line and actually doing a backup. And the way to do a quick backup is to select one small virtual machine. I will just choose tet_NFS. The command is backup VM tet_NFS. And this will now start the backup of hopefully a small virtual machine. It creates a snapshot within VMware. It tells me on which data store this virtual machine is sitting and the files that are being transferred into the TSM server. In my case, everything was successful. Thank you very much for your attention, and you will also find another video which actually shows TSM for virtual environments in action, and you can also see the plugin actually performing backups in that other video. Thank you very much.